efforts by President Trump and his staff to undermine climate science have created a widening rift with government agencies, other countries and leaders in his own party. Washington, new efforts by President Trump and his staff to question or undermine the established science of climate change have created a widening rift between the White House on one side, and scientific facts, government agencies, and some leading figures in the president's own party on the other. The president's senior advisors are exploring the idea of creating a panel aimed at questioning the national climate assessment. According to a White House memo, the group would include William Happer, a Princeton physicist who has asserted that carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas that scientists say is trapping heat and warming the planet, is beneficial to humanity. The climate assessment, a sweeping report issued by the White House itself in November, concluded decisively that the burning of fossil fuels was warming the atmosphere, leading to a raft of harmful effects across the United States and the world. And Mr. Trump announced last week on Twitter that he would nominate Kelly Knight Craft to be his ambassador to the United Nations. Ms. Craft said in a 2017 television interview that, on the issue of climate change, she believes there are scientists on both sides that are accurate. There is no precedent for something like this, said Douglas Brinkley, a historian who has written books on 5 former United States presidents. Other presidents have attacked policy initiatives, but not science. At the same time, more senior Republicans, including those in Congress, are moving in the opposite direction, acknowledging the established science and publicly calling to reduce fossil fuel pollution. To be sure, some Republicans continue to question, or, more commonly, to remain silent on the issue of human-caused climate change, but in February, 3 of the top-ranking Republicans on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, Greg Walden of Oregon, Fred Upton of Michigan, and John Shimkus of Illinois, published an op-ed on the website Real Clear Policy in which they said, climate change is real, and called for innovations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Similarly, in December, Senator John Barrasso, the Wyoming Republican who is chairman of the Senate Environment Committee, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times in which he acknowledged his acceptance of climate science but also criticized the Paris Agreement and proposals to tax carbon dioxide emissions. Republican pollsters and staff members said the White House's efforts to attack the science, that fossil fuel pollution traps heat, warms the planet, and contributes to more severe droughts, heat waves and hurricanes, could backfire and put Mr. Trump fundamentally at odds with his own party. A lot of thoughtful Republicans have accepted the reality of climate change and are wrestling with questions of policy, Whit Ayers, a prominent Republican pollster, said. Mr. Ayers noted that many Republicans had concerns about climate change policies like taxing or regulating coal and oil pollution. But he said that questioning the foundational science of climate change could become a political liability. There are perfectly legitimate questions to be raised about whether a dollar spent fighting climate change is better spent on health care or education, Mr. Ayers said. But there are no longer credible questions to be raised about the existence of climate change. If the White House ends up there, that is simply not credible. White House officials initially sought to play down the national climate assessment by publishing it late in the afternoon the Friday after Thanksgiving. But its dramatic findings, that the impacts of climate change could knock as much as 10% off the size of the American economy by century's end, received a lot of attention around the country. Analysts also noted that the findings of the assessment could provide legal ammunition to opponents of Mr. Trump's efforts to roll back climate change regulations, since the report makes the case that increasing greenhouse emissions is harmful to humanity. It was those factors that prompted the White House effort to establish a panel or committee that would question or contradict those comprehensive scientific findings, according an administration official, who was not authorized to discuss the matter publicly and who spoke on condition of anonymity, and a former senior White House official with knowledge of the matter. But the creation of such a panel, should it come about, would put Mr. Trump in a highly unusual position. In particular, experts said, presidents have never sought to undermine the findings of the National Academies of Science, created by President Abraham Lincoln to provide unbiased scientific findings to the country's leaders. The group played a key role in reviewing the conclusions of the National Climate Assessment. If there is one body that has the thorough respect of scientists and policymakers, it is the National Academies, said Michael Oppenheimer, a professor of geosciences and international relations at Princeton University. I can't recall any time that an administration has tried to debunk a review by the National Academy, or where the White House ever tried to re-review something the Academy has reviewed. Critics of the president also singled out his announcement that he would nominate Ms. Kraft as ambassador to the United Nations, given that her comments on climate change are far outside the mainstream of established science. "She's taken this bizarre position," said R. Nicholas Burns, who served as Under-Secretary of State for Political Affairs during the George W. Bush administration. "She will find that in New York, at the Security Council, climate change is one of the top issues. If the representative of the world's largest economy and one of the largest emitters doesn't understand the science of this issue, it makes the U.S. look feckless and irresponsible." Ms. Kraft, currently the United States ambassador to Canada, and her husband, Joseph W. Kraft III, a billionaire coal magnate from Kentucky, were major contributors to Mr. Trump's 2016 presidential campaign and donated to his inaugural committee.